Alison, Richard, of course, and Austen, and Kate, co-director as well. We're just going to have, well, I'm going to chip in. I'm just here to sort of get pressure. But we're just going to hopefully open out this discussion and hopefully be a good conversation between you three, essentially, rather than us.
Yeah, I wanted to start off by just revisiting Richard's idea that he set up about transmitters and receivers and the noise in the channel. I'm assuming that Richard sees himself as a transmitter in his drawings, and I'd probably and possibly put David into that camp as well. And I would say that because David, you seem to adopt similar kinds of approaches to making drawings that Richard does, in the sense that you create a set of principles to start off with. So you carefully select your materials, a set of procedures, and a set of principles that you're going to follow. And through following those procedures, the drawings are made. Would you agree with that? So, talking about the drawings that are...
I'm just worried about this giving and receiving bit. I'm not quite sure whether I'm a giver or a receiver.
Is it better to give than to receive?
Well, I was thinking in sort of prison parlance or something. But the question was...
Well, just maybe you could talk a little bit about how the process of making those works, and how you feel that, what does it do to the kind of thinking process, the fact that you've already kind of, certain things are predetermined before you embark on the actual making of the work. So what does that do to the sort of thinking process?
First of all, I should defend myself from that dreadful slur that Mr. Batchelor is when he said that my drawings were paintings. No, suspiciously look like paintings. Actually, the drawing bit is the bit the paint's not on, if you look at them.
So, percentages?
It's like one of those defence committees in Homeland, isn't it? But yeah, it's unusual. Well, maybe not so unusual these days, because I'm an artist who I suppose makes art that is both abstract and figurative, for want of a better word. But in all of the work I do, it's very, very much about the materials. In fact, the starting point is often the excuse for using, how you've made the thing itself. So the subject matter is really then something I turn into. For me, the interest is in how it's made. And in everything I make, it all really comes from the material. So, for instance, in the two works we have up here, David touched upon, I think, earlier about paper. It's interesting we talk so much about the material that goes on the paper, but right from the very beginning, it's the paper. And it has an unusual, so you start to think straight away about, if I take this gouache, how does it lay upon a particular kind of paper? Does it sink in? Does it sit on the surface? Does it move? Is the paper, like we said before, is it expensive paper? Is it cheap paper? Is it hot pressed or cold pressed? And so all of those things, to me, the materials are very, very important. The works in this show I've made with gouache, and anyone who works with gouache will know it's incredibly dense and opaque, but it's also luminous, and you've only got to look at something like Matisse's cutouts to see that, or even Indian miniatures that use the same material. So in this case, it's denseness that attracts me to it. But that's what I do in all my work. Because I make paintings, and the paint it's very much about oil and what that material is, and how it goes onto the tooth of a canvas. But it's also when I make films as well, and it's all about materiality of the film. And also, the one thing that connects the materials to me is probably the time it takes to make a piece of work. Looking at those drawings now, I sign all the work I make with the dates, the exact date on when it's been done, because for me art is a kind of time machine, and when I look at, say, the drawings then, and I think they're about 15 years old, I think one's 10 and one's about 15, I can immediately go back to the exact time and place it was when I made them, and I've always thought that was terrifically interesting.
And also, I mean, in your work, in those particular pieces, the whole process is kind of laid bare, isn't it? It's you haven't gone back on yourself. You haven't. There's no erasure.
No, that's not allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the drawings will start off from a set of rules, if you like, in this case, and it was about painting a square and then painting another square next to it, and then the drawing itself is really the line without any paint on it. It becomes like a web, if you like. But I start off very organized in my head. I have a set of rules, but it's really the equivalent, though, of lining up 6 identical shot glasses full of vodka, in my case, on a very nice bar. So it's absolutely perfect and all the same, and then drinking them one after another, and then all hell breaks loose. Or things will mildly go astray in this case.
But you didn't drink vodka when you made these.
No, that's not what I said, but
So
actually, I couldn't do that. I couldn't drink, and I've never done that, actually. I've never drunk, and yeah.
well, no, I mean, you can see there's a great deal of precision that's gone into those works.
So, I mean, that's how I think of them too. I think they're revealed rather than the drawing. The act of drawing is, in David's case, is an act of revealing the drawing. Whatever he does to put the colour on is neither here nor there in a way. But the drawing's there before he starts, and what he does is reveal it.
I try to do as less as possible. Often people, when they've commented on my work, they talk about the level of craft that's in it. But actually, I always try to do as less as possible. For me, I have a very workmanlike attitude to making all the works that I do. I only do up to, hopefully, exactly what's needed.
But there's a great precision. I mean, there is, the way you've actually kind of hand torn the piece of paper. It's got deliberately kind of frayed edges, and then you've employed incredible precision in taking the line right to the kind of frayed edges. So it's workmanlike in a very precise, skilled kind of way. Alison, I wanted to compare it or contrast it to the way that you make your work. I
quite like workmanlike in a very precise, skilled kind of way. I've seen a lot of workmanlike things which are very imprecise and unskilled. But,
I didn't mean it in that derogatory way. You know?
No, that was Kate saying workmanlike and skilled.
Yeah, I meant in
craftsman.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Alison, whereas I feel that with David's work you can see where he's been, you can retrace it. With your two pieces, which unfortunately are not visible to everybody right this moment, but I'm sure everybody's looked at them. There's sort of you're sort of aware that there are kind of things that are hidden, things that have happened, spillages have occurred, different stages. You've gone through different stages. The pages, the paper is quite distressed. It feels like it's been quite heavily worked, and you're having to decide when it's finished, which seems to me a completely different way of working to David. Can you talk a little bit about it? I mean, where do you actually? What's the starting point, and what are you actually trying to do in a drawing?
Well, I think in these drawings, I'm trying to find out what the subject of the drawing is, because I don't know until with these kinds of drawings, I don't know what it is. And so it begins with a sort of fear of the paper, I think, and a need to get something on it so I can react and respond to it. And obviously I can't remember what the first thing was. I mean, it could have been anything.
How do you choose the paper?
I like a quality paper, although I don't really know anything about paper. I mean, you're talking about hot press, cold press, linen, whatever, but cotton.
Sound more authoritative than I actually am.
I just, I just buy what kind of off-white paper normally. So both of the drawings, which were done at different times, would have started very differently. I know the drawing on the left started with mixing up a lot of dried hibiscus leaves, and actually that drawing probably should be in a dark space because I think it's I mean, it had faded anyway, but I'm not very precious about these things. And I make up a lot of rules as I go along. I mean, I do have a few rules, but I sort of tend to bend them and break them. And I did discover what the drawing on the right was about, I think, through the process of doing it. I'm really not sure about the one on the left. I don't know what that is.
I'm not sure they're rules if you make them up as you go along. It's
Why not?
rules. I'm not playing any games with you, Ren, if that's...
Well,
But one of the things that you do is you obviously use things which are materials that are unpredictable, so there's an element of chance. So you didn't really know what colours were going to be generated by the hibiscus leaves when they were wet. And similarly...
I did actually.
Right. So did you try that out on another...
No, but it's quite obvious. I mean, it's a very dark, sort of purpley red. And actually, it's very beautiful when it first happened, but it does fade.
Mm. And then the other one, you've used colour impregnated strips.
I found this very weird paper with colour impregnated into it. I don't know what it was for, some weird photography thing. But that's the other thing. Although in the sculpture I make, I know a lot about materials. I don't really know anything about paint. So when you said that gouache was really sort of luminous, I've used gouache a lot, but I don't really know the qualities of it and how you should use it. I do kind of make it up as I go along. And so I will use anything that is at hand, often not terribly suitable, probably.
So it is a more experimental process.
No, it's not experimental, it's just pragmatic, perhaps.
But the drawing goes through a sort of transformation as you work it.
Yes, and there are things that happen that I like, and then I'll pursue that. And then, the drawing on the right would have been very intense, actually. What I do now, especially in the drawings that aren't abstract, the drawings that have a subject before I start, I will do them in a series, so there's no pressure on one drawing, which is hideous, actually, for me, because it's so easy to bugger a drawing up, and then it seems such a waste of effort, time, whatever. And so if I have 10 drawings that I'm doing at the same time on the table, the pressure's off. I do something I like, I can leave it and move on to the next one. And then if I do screw half of them up, it's okay. But there were only ever 3 drawings like the one on the right, and one of them's gone missing, and that's probably the best one. But they were very intense.
And you title them. So, just to go back to this, do you consider them to be abstract? I mean, one of them's titled Crate, and the other one's titled Reactor.
Yeah, well, Crate, because I realised that one of the things that for me the drawing was about was a crate, actually. Well, it's about packing something inside something else, and those are the kind of rules. I think there were a lot of lines going all over the place, and it was a method of joining them up, of making sense of what I'd previously done, and in so doing, I thought, oh yeah, actually I know what I'm doing now, and then I realised that's really what it was. Well, it's one of the things that it was. It's not everything, but
Was that making sense of something you'd done in a sculpture or in another drawing?
I mean, I could invent a connection that would probably fool you, but I don't know whether there really is any connection. But there are similarities between things that I made at that time, I think.
Of sculptures you made at that time? Yeah. Certainly the idea of a kind of lattice work that comes through in your...
Yes, yeah. There's a kind of construction there that I can see.
But one thing that they seem to kind of, well, Crate in particular sits quite solidly on the page, which feels the way that your sculptures sort of always seem to kind of sit quite.
I don't think it does actually.
You don't?
No, I think it's just in there, in the middle of the page. It's not located anywhere, I don't think.
Which is different from your sculptures. Feel very located and they sit very, very solidly on the ground. Which I would say was different from the way that a lot of Richards.
Is the crate the paper? Or
That's an interesting question. No, I don't think so.
so
sorry, go on.
So there's the thing is packed. It's a depiction of
packing.
Something of packing.
But there's nothing being packed. It's just about packing, I think. But the drawing on the left, I definitely did try to locate it. I tried to sort of ground it, I think. I'm not sure that it was very successful, actually.
Because you actually used pinpricks and that as well, so you physically...
Yeah, the pinpricks were... I mean, that... I don't know really why I did that. I started doing that with quite a lot of drawings at that time. I think a different way of making a mark, perhaps.
I'm just interested in the way you use drawing maybe compares to the way that Richard makes drawing.
I'm being very evasive here. I'm talking about my clients. Except I'm the curator here. I'm not a drawer here.
No, but I mean, I think people would be interested to know a little bit, even though we had the conversation about that specifically last week. Just to sort of, I mean, one thing that you've said is that for your authors, when they're singing series of drawings, you approach those as if you were making sculpture. So you wanted to adopt procedures that you might use when making sculptures and adopt them in making the drawings, which I think maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, that series of drawings, the sculptures, so what I think was kind of interesting was I'd made sculptures and then I transferred the technique, the things that I used in making the sculpture to making the drawings, so that sculptures precede the drawings, and that the thing that was transferred was the idea of keeping something whole and kind of folding it up, or kind of actually it's more like unwrapping in the drawings, whereas in the sculpture it's more like folding them up. But that was the bit. So that seemed to be the bit that was transferred, and I thought they were autonomous. They weren't. Or they were analogous to making sculptures. And each drawing started with something. I could have treated the. I mean, in retrospect, I think I could have treated the paper differently. But and there is. I mean, there's, to just deviate just a little bit. There is something about paper that both Davids have introduced that is quite an interesting thing that I also know that there are times when I can't draw because I don't like the paper, and I can't find a piece of paper that I like. And then there are sometimes when I can draw because I've found a supply of paper that I like. And a group of little drawings was very dependent on that I made in the 90s. Were very dependent on coming across a kind of pad of paper that I liked. Those big drawings, the office drawings are related to a single roll of paper that was cut up. And I do stockpile paper, thinking that it could come in handy at some future date, and mostly it doesn't. So I have quite a lot of paper that is unused.
That's what I do.
You do the same, yeah.
Yeah,
I came back from India with 100 sheets of handmade paper, which are still stuck in my.
Yeah, I've got
studio.
paper I bought 25 years ago, and I've still never, and over the years now I have pretty much anything. So if you do have it, it's there. And also, there's a great beauty about paper when it does get old as well.
It becomes more interesting.
Well, that's gone.
Becomes more-
Hasn't it yellowed a little bit? Or was it always quite the blue one? Was it always quite a yellow paper? Or?
Do you know, I think that's probably quite a cheap piece of Indian paper, and then the one on the right is on a more expensive kind of handmade paper. So yeah, it simply doesn't yellow in the same way. But I think, like everybody, I think on the whole, most of the drawings I make are not. They're all things in themselves. That they don't relate to. A sketch for something else. But I do reserve the sketch part of what I do when I am making notes or making, say, a drawing just to work out how something should go. They're all on backs of envelopes. I like cutting envelopes open, from the post and then using the back of that, and that takes away that fear, if you like. It seems far quicker to get those ideas down than something like that.
Someone asked me earlier about a drawing that I would like to have in this show that isn't here. And there was a show I saw in New York at the Guggenheim Mondrian show, which had a series of cigarette packets in it, which with opened up cigarette packets with line, and I would have really liked to have had one of those Mondrian cigarette packets in the show, which is a bit equivalent to David saying. The doors on the back, they were fantastic.
Danny Flavin was quite.
Does he? Yeah.
So David.
I wish I'd known that. Could have asked.
Was that a great quote Austen's about Mondrian? It's like having a gun pointed in your face.
I read that one.
What's that?
Austen.
So when the other works on paper that you make, David, are your figures, your watercolours on paper. But you've talked about those, even though they are of figures. Do you adopt strategies such as those employed to make those pieces to avoid figuration in some way, do you see your figures? I'm just interested in how you see abstraction.
Well, in the abstract works I make, they are just abstract. I don't see them as having any relationship to anything. So normally they are made out of stripes and circles and squares and things like that. But at the same time, something can set me off. It can be the colour of a cigarette packet, for instance, or it could be a piece of paint, or a feathers on an oceanic mask, or a tea bowl in the British museum. There's all sorts of things that can set you up. You'll be on the top of the bus and see a certain colour, you know, against another colour, and that will set you up. So it's a strange thing, I think. So when I do the abstract things, they're completely abstract, but in a strange way, through the making of them, maybe they veer towards, if you like, figuration, because maybe they start to look like something or have a kind of sensation or something that you relate to in real life. I mean, I see them that they are real because I made them, you know, so they become real. And then the figure watercolours I make, they're very tiny and they're made with watercolour. And watercolour is a completely different medium to go back on that thing with gouache. It's you know, it's about light, it's transparent, it's fast, and it has a different speed of the way it goes on the paper, say, to gouache, which is kind of quite slow. And then when you make the watercolours, it's fast. And people used to say, how long does it take you to do one of your watercolours? And I would go, oh, because I had no idea, because when I'm in them, I don't know. But I would guess that it would be about a minute. And then I really hated saying that, because it sounded really a bit rubbish. Not that it was quick, it just sounded like I don't know. It just didn't sound very classy. So now I say, it takes me moments to do them. I just think that's so much nicer, you know. And whereas I must admit, one of those things. Often I made those in the evenings as well. Those very because they're more labour intensive. They would take an evening. So it takes me moments of trying to get back on track. Moments to make one of these watercolour figures. But only a fool would look at one of these figures and say that looks like a real human being. They have strange breasts, they have long feet, they're really weird. They're very odd. And they're just and they come out the size, because that's the size they are in my head. You know, they're about that big. And so that's how they come down. And they're weirdly more abstract, because I just start them in the middle, I position the figure in my head, and then I start from there, and then it just makes itself. And I'm a great believer in accidentally on purpose. You know, and there's a lot of work in here. When we were talking about precision earlier, it's kind of doing something very precise in an accidental way. You know, so in a way, I think the figurative things that I make, I think, go towards abstraction. They move that way, and that's kind of my job, is to move them that way. And the abstract things, through no fault of my own, move the other way. So I think they actually get quite close together in the end. I think all artists sometimes like to do things that somehow you try to put everything in the medium, the time, the location, everything. You try to put it where something happens. You know, that's kind of what you look for a lot of the time, and a lot of it is trying to get yourself into this accidental, on purpose kind of thing to happen. Well, it is for me, anyways, and it is, I think, for the things that I like, the art that I like, I suppose.
I think drawing's really physical. It only works for me when I'm kind of dancing, actually. And if it isn't like that, nothing will happen. I don't know. What do you think?
The paper's on the table or the paper's on the wall?
The paper's on the table, and I'm moving around it. And
So you do it at times, you make, because you go through sort of phases when you make lots of drawings, and that's when you're in a particular kind of state of mind.
Agitation. So
yeah.
it's not something that I would do as an exercise, like every day. Like I know some people that, you know, feel it's very important to keep in touch with the drawing. I mean, I scribble in a notebook for that, but no, it's a feeling that comes upon me.
So it's about agility, sort of keeping.
It's just about being in the mood for it, really. It actually doesn't happen very often. It's only happened twice last year.
But you produce lots of drawings then, yeah?
No, maybe
What,
20. That's all.
Twice? You only did drawings twice this year?
Yeah, last year.
You should
Last year.
use your artist equity card or something.
Let's go back to accidentally on purpose. There's a nice example over here. Again, Garth. This isn't in the centre of the piece of paper, but Garth signed it down here. should we trim off a piece of paper to put the square into the middle? He said, no, that's how it's supposed to be. It's true that its off-centeredness makes it a more interesting thing to look at, but I didn't believe it. I still that he did it on purpose. I think he thought he was putting it in the middle, but he'd mismeasured. So there's an acceptance, and I think having kind of decided to do the drawing, and to stick the all those pieces on there, then you get to the end and you find that it's kind of slightly whiffy and not quite centered. I think there's a to then not take the opportunity to correct it is a kind of really interesting decision, and to accept that the rules are don't allow you to kind of go back and kind of redo it, are what enables, and I think it's a bit the same with the halves, like I was talking about earlier, but those there's a kind of willfulness or that allows other things to come out. Like, I think it is a more interesting drawing to look at because it's off-centered.
You've spoken about drawing being a means to, you set up these rules, but in the sense the rules give you a freedom from constraint.
Well, I think rules can give you freedoms. Yeah, they don't have to. They can give you freedoms, or they can stop habits. And push you away from habits. It doesn't have to. It doesn't.
Well, it's not your fault. It takes away individual responsibility. You set of rules, doesn't it?
Yeah, and opens up. Not
Which is
your
the
fault.
freedom,
It's quite
which is
not
a
your
strange
fault.
freedom,
It's quite
you know,
an interesting way of putting it.
I made it, but it's not my fault.
It
They
just
made
happened.
me do it.
It just happened to me. Yeah.
I think it's quite interesting to think of Sam, who's here, Sam Messenger's drawing, which we've all been looking at intently the whole seminar because it's behind the table. But I mean, I don't want to sort of put you on the spot, Sam, but one of the things that really attracted Richard and myself to the work was the what's happening around the edges, really. And I just wanted, I just wanted to know that if you had intended to frame it in that way, because when we saw it in the studio, it was unframed. And did you envisage?
From the very beginning, I was well aware of the market as being something interesting, but was trying to talk myself out of being too interested until I didn't become control. I wanted all these letter marks to be absolutely genuine and get your pen to work and get into it. But I was aware of it from the very first, from the beginning. So I've seen the weird drawings where he's got pen working and he's using that as a sign of his work. So I try not to keep it in mind too much.
So you did always see that as a very crucial part of the work?
I didn't, I did, but I hadn't made a decision until very last minute.
There are Tipex marks on this one, which are not dissimilar.
Yeah.
Except they're, rather than trying to make something work, they're kind of errors that have been Tipex. But it's a very, the Tipex is very kind of casual in relationship to how apparently strict the drawing is. There are errors within this one which are really quite interesting.
The geometry is strict, but then when she started, the
The
errors
geometry
come.
is and isn't strict.
Yeah, but the loss of control is when she starts using, it's like the felt tip pen is almost like a kind of stippled, she's just about kept it within the lines, but she's set herself. Alison, I was going to ask you about, one thing we asked artists to do was suggest some titles for our reading list, and Alison suggested two titles. The Past from Above and Tribal and Village Rugs. And I just wondered, I know that, I mean, a lot in terms of the first title, The Past from Above, I know a lot of you often sort of adopt an aerial perspective in the work you make. But I just wondered if the works here have any particular specific relationship to those titles and in what way?
They don't, but I can see them. I mean, it's not a conscious connection, but the reason I chose that book is that it makes sense of things that are very hard to understand when you're actually there in reality. I mean, if you've ever been to, say, Troy in Turkey and walked among the ruins, you simply cannot make sense of it. But what all those aerial photographs do of all these archaeological sites all over the world, from Iceland, Portugal, lots in Syria and Iran, you suddenly understand what it is, building, village, drainage system or whatever. And they're just completely beautiful because they're in the context of the landscape. And I am aware that a lot of the things that I've made have that kind of view from above, looking down, and I really like that connection, but it's completely not conscious. And when I was asked to choose a couple of books, I took quite a long time thinking about it, and then I suddenly thought, yes, well, this is the one, because the book comes from an exhibition that was at the British Museum about, 15 years ago or something. And a lot of the sites we'd actually been to, and there was one particular one that was really new to me, and it was one of the churches in Ethiopia seen from above in Lalibela. And I thought, my God, what is that thing? And I read about it, and I eventually went there, and so it's kind of through that book that I made that connection. Subsequent to that, I made quite a lot of very small works that, again, not deliberately, but something about that looking down and finding a structure that's been made below came through these small things that I made. So I thought that actually it's a really fantastic book. And the other book, The Tribal Rugs, that's the detail, because there's a rug is a narrative, it's a story, each rug is, and it's full of these tiny, meaningful motifs, which, I completely love tribal rugs, obviously, and I really like that connection between something that is very, very close up and detailed and something that is really the bigger picture, where the middle bit is completely excised.
David Sylvester did a great exhibition at the Hayward, in the Eastern Carpet in the Western World.
Oh yes,
which
it was fantastic.
Introduced a way of looking at both a flat surface and a vertical surface, but particularly a kind of flat thing. It introduced a whole new way of understanding a pattern, a piece of pattern.
When was that?
Eastern Carpet in the Western World
That was a long time
ago. It was
80s
and certainly in Hayward.
82 or something. 86.
And there was it's really good that Alison chose carpets, because there are. I also saw a show in LA of a carpet called the Coronation Carpet, which is huge, which was in a painting by Sargent, I think. The coronation of King George, King Edward VII, and then the rug was somehow got to the States. I can't remember. It's a huge rug. And it was shown, but it's shown in a room like this, at sort of table height, and just flat out. And it was like going in and seeing a field.
There's one in V&A in
there is.
in the Islamic section. It's completely beautiful how they light it. It's fantastic.
Which brings us back to Annie Alvis.
Yes, weaving. Tapestry.
And the other thing about weaving is that the line and the as it were, the paper and the pencil are the same thing. So weaving creates its own surface at the same time as drawing out the pattern or the design on the surface.
I have actually made some woven drawings.
So where you cut out strips and...
Yes, and I mean very simplistic, but actually I think the drawing that I did for the last but one drawing auction thing.
Yeah, it had that. It did have.
Was and it started off as an image. It was a drawing of a wolf, and I chopped it into little strips and turned it into a kind of abstract rug. But it always pulls the paper at the edges. So I mean it's quite a three-dimensional thing.
And just to sort of talk about the reading lists, David, you had suggested a couple of poetry anthologies.
Yeah. Unlike Alison, I did my list really fast, actually. I did it in about...
Moments.
In a moment. Mainly because one of the things I do, I have a huge library of books. I mean, so it's something that's very important to me. So what I do is look up at the shelf and to sort of chose every third book in the bit where I was kind of thinking about, because it's usually the ones that find their way closer to me on the ones I'm looking at. But also I remember, yes, it was also because I also thought about some of the books I would have been looking at that time, that period. And one of the books was The Grey Cloth, which is this a novel written by a guy called Paul Shearbart, the early part of the 20th century. And it's this amazing book about this architect who makes glass buildings all over the world that he travels to in this hot air balloon. And these glass buildings are made of incredible colours, so when the light goes through them they get lit up, and they're extremely beautiful. And a lot of the Bauhaus architects read this book and were quite influenced by it. And some of the structures that he talks about, how things are built, they weren't really ready to make those structures at that time, but then did. You know, glass architecture, glass and steel architecture became big. But it's also kind of nice in the novel because the people who work, there's these particular women who have to work in these buildings, and the architect's wife all have to wear grey, so it doesn't conflict with the colours coming through the building. Now that was a book I remember reading at that time when I was making those kinds of things, and I'm not sure whether it kind of goes alongside as opposed to an influence. And then looking at my list, literature and poetry is an enormous influence on what I do, and it can be from the feel of a novel to a word out of a poem or a whole poem itself. Poetry is incredibly important to me. It's to do with the way it's condensed. I think sometimes people talk about poetry as if it's been distilled, but it's not really. That would be, otherwise you could turn a novel into a poem, by crushing it. But that condensedness is something that's very important to me. And because it's something that in all of my work, I think it's the trait that goes through it all. There's a kind of intensity and crushing of matter into something, really, that I think I go through that process. I mean, I've put Paul Celan and Hart Crane, but I could have put a number of, poets. And then I put a couple of Yukio Mishima books, and he's a writer who you would all know. But what I love about Mishima was when you read it, one is the great elegance and the great elegance in which he talks about very violent things, very sexual things, very violent things, but they're done in this very, very beautifully controlled manner. But he's also one of the great colorists. He always has beautiful colours in his books. And I often get incredibly excited when you talk about a particular yellow or something, and then I have to go and make it. So those are things that are. And then the other thing to say is that I had because you asked for some sound pieces, and one of mine was the Gavin Bryars, Jesus' blood never failed me yet, and you'll probably know it as when it's a tramp, and he repeats that over and over and over as a song. And I heard it very late one night, the very first time, and I actually thought he was saying, love never found me yet. And so I completely misheard this thing. And it's part of also this accidental thing that often happens with me.
Jesus' love never found me yet.
No, just love never found me yet.
See, the Jesus somehow got kind
No,
of...
because it's Jesus' blood never found me
Yeah,
yet.
I know
So
that. No.
much better, writing.
No,
right?
I think
But
love never found me yet. It's quite a nice one.
Yeah, so it takes you off in yet another direction. So a lot of these influences are things that influence you in a very direct way, but also they can influence you in a very indirect way in ways that you're not, or because you misconceive or you misread or whatever. But on the whole, all of those people I think I've got on this list are what I said. They're all quite intense. They're all quite
Okay, I think, are there any questions
Did you
from
get to the end?
the audience?
That's Gavin Bryars.
It just goes on and on.
I know. You get to...
Yeah.
Does anybody want
You
to
listen
ask
to it all the way through.
any
Yeah.
questions? Yeah, we've got one there.
If we just turn this round and then
I thought it'd be quite interesting to link with memory and drawing, because often it's said that if you draw something, you really memorize it, right? Because it's often in relation to what people know observation. And I just wonder what, also Alison's comment about the drawing and saying whether you remember it, making it or not. I thought that was very curious. Or the mention of books that you know really while you making these drawings. So how about the relationship with them? Do you usually remember making that particular drawing? And does that take you back in time, particularly smells or other things?
I don't remember it when it's tucked away somewhere. I don't remember any of my work when I don't really see it in front of me. But as soon as I see something, then not only do I remember the pieces, but I can see everything. I remember making it.
Yeah.
You know, I remember even the mixing of how. I mean, I can see how what I've mixed it to, the constitute, how thick it is, how thin it is, all those things. You know. And also when you look, if you're a maker and you look at other people who've made things, you inhabit their memories once you start to look at a piece of work, whether that's solar wit or an ancient Egyptian piece. You know, that's.
I think Robert Rauschenberg tried to see if he could forget a drawing. So with the rubbing out of de Kooning, that this is an attempt to introduce forgetting into the act of drawing. It would be an interesting basis to start from, to want to try to draw something in order to forget it. Theoretically, I think that would be possible to try to draw something in order to forget it. You kind of draw it and throw it away somehow, or sort of. But then you would remember that you'd done that, so it would become slightly self-defeating exercise. But there would be.
Exorcism.
Pardon?
A sort of exorcism.
Yeah, you could. It would be quite interesting to draw as a way.
I like just throwing it away, or eating it, or setting it on
Eating
fire,
it,
or something. Yeah, I really like that.
Turning it
idea.
into a paper plane.
Are you saying that it would be? Do you think you could?
I think there's some. I don't know if it's possible or not, but it strikes me as interesting.
I love that idea. It's like voodoo. There is a strange quality. I think this show after I've been looking at it for some time, and then talking to you, that there is almost a kind of odd science fiction quality.
Well, I do like science fiction.
Yeah,
so,
and it's there.
as
It seems to be in the work.
as
When you
Michelle
were
knows.
mentioning Tarkovsky, when Emma was talking about Tarkovsky, you know, I mean, when I saw those pieces, you know, the other day in your talk, when you showed these sculptures, they were like your sculptures, but they were hovering up there in midair.
Right.
It's as if gravity had disappeared, as if you were like the first sculptor on the moon or something, you know. And I found that really fascinating. And then I was thinking, looking at the show, is that of course because of the paper and the freedom, the paper is in a way without gravity, isn't it? You can move around in it in a kind of space ship kind of way, you know. But there's also a science fiction quality in it, but it's almost like a grubby, sort of dirty science fiction. It's not like all gleaming and shiny. It's something getting polluted as well. That's probably just me. I'm off again.
Blade Runner.
No, more like Tarkovsky, like Solaris.
Solaris is quite a polluted film.
You're thinking of the planet.
Blade Runner is quite. Yeah, but that.
Yeah. These sort of shifting gases turning into
something that
ectoplasm, turning into a real object. You know.
Well, that's because of the materiality.
And that's to do with memories, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the
It works on
the
your
planet.
memories,
The planet
yeah.
draws memories out.
Yeah.
Actually, Richard, there's something you said in your amazing book on your writings that I don't know if that's very relevant, but it's called In Praise of TV.
Yeah.
And it all came with stories about how you grew up with no TV and you would have to go to friends to see it when you were a little lad.
Yeah.
And there's all those programs about how to make things or DIY
Yeah.
programs. And you got frustrated because you see the first program and it was like the beginnings of something, and then you might miss the middle programs and then you'd see the end and it was all finished, or the program would never show you.
Or you couldn't. Well, you couldn't keep up with the thing.
Yeah.
Right? It was
You'd
kind of
never
supposed to be
see
live,
that-
and you couldn't keep up.
that process in
And
between.
here's one I made earlier.
Yeah, that's right. They used to do.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
But it just,
It's Barry Bucknell.
yeah,
Very.
I don't remember.
He wouldn't. You're too young.
But I do remember those sorts of programs.
But they were fantastic.
But yeah, but there was, I wonder if that has fed a little bit into your ideas, the sculpture particularly, sort of fragments and the sum of a number of parts, on the way that you're looking to the sort of interferences and gaps, and you talk about gaps and interferences in your work. So I wonder if that ever came through. Do you think that's fed through since you were...
All right. So it's kind of whether the problems of live TV and labour introduced a kind of stopgap, a frustration in the ability to make. That I don't know. It could be.
But then isn't it about making it up? If you've missed
Yeah,
it,
you make it up.
you took it up.
Yeah.
And the things she was making were horrible. How to cover a door in hardboard.
Everyone did it though, didn't they?
Yeah, you can make it modern, cover it in hardboard.
Childhood is just one long list of disappointments.
But it does feed into artist work, I think, early years of things. Or when you're
For
a
sure.
foundation of college.
Absolutely.
Early years.
I've got one more question.
Concrete, like last night.
Yeah.
I'm going to follow up on what Lega was asking earlier, but I'm going to ask that question I thought she was asking. Is there one particular work in the show that you would take home with you? Or is that unfair to
Well, it's slightly unfair. I'd take the Annie Albert assumption. But I think there might be some competition in that.
Well, it's been a really rich afternoon, I think. If there's any more questions, but I think...
Thank you.
So thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.